what we said earlier about the microphones and the videos. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, with the closure of schools, governments, teachers, and other education stakeholders in Africa and around the globe are looking for or are even implementing alternative education delivery methods to ensure that quality teaching and learning continue in this unprecedented period of school disruption. It is in this context that UNESCO IGBA, whose mandate is to strengthen the capacities of teachers and teaching policies in Africa, is organizing this webinar to help share information and experiences in school governance and leadership, and look forward beyond the current crisis resulting from the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. The webinar seeks to create an opportunity for education experts to collectively reflect on how school leadership and governance can be enhanced to address the current unpredictable education sector challenges posed by the coronavirus pandemic and during the school reopening process, which many countries have started. The objectives of the webinar include the following: to provide a platform to reflect on the role of school leadership and management in ensuring continuity of teaching and learning amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Second, to discuss the current challenges school leaders have faced in creating linkages with the learners, the teachers, the communities amid the COVID-19 pandemic. To discuss the key ingredients and innovative strategies needed to build resilient school leaders and managers that can ably support those mostly in need. And last but not least, to deliberate on the various strategies to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of school leadership and governance at the national level to better respond to the emerging education needs and challenges in the region amid the current COVID-19 during school reopening and post-pandemic. To discuss this very important topic, we have invited experts of the sector that our colleague Victoria will introduce to you in a while, as we'll be conducting the panel discussion. But before coming to them, we have the honor to receive among us Professor Hubert Gizen, the Regional Director of UNESCO Southern Africa, based in Harare, Zimbabwe. Professor Hubert is our keynote speaker of today's webinar. To tell you a bit about Professor Hubert, as I said, he's the Regional Director and Representative for UNESCO's Multi-Sectorial Regional Office for Southern Africa. He holds a PhD in environmental biotechnology and has an established career of over 34 years in both academics and in international cooperation. He has worked in academic institutions and universities, the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, in embassies and in international institutes abroad and the United Nations. Throughout his career, he has lived and worked in various countries and regions in Africa, South America and Caribbean, South Asia, Southeast Asia, and Europe, in a range of senior functions as full professor and chair in universities and as a diplomat in the battlefield. So, Professor, we have the honor to receive you, and I'm straight away giving you the floor for the keynote speech. Professor, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you very much, Director of Ceremonies. Good afternoon to everyone, dear colleagues, government representatives, teachers who are connected, ladies and gentlemen. Let me first of all start by really congratulating IGBA for bringing all of us together to discuss about the importance of school leadership and governance in the context of this ongoing COVID-19 crisis here in Africa. the crisis, of course, globally, but let's focus the discussion a bit on school leadership and governance in Africa. I also thank Igba for inviting me to share a few thoughts, a few remarks in the opening session of this important webinar. So thank you very much. I'm pleased really that so many of you found time to connect, where we have so many of these virtual meetings nowadays ongoing. That's the reason why I was a few minutes late for this one. I was in another meeting, and it shows really to me that there is a lot of interest and also dedication to the topic of school leadership and governance in times of COVID-19. Now, before going into the specifics on school leadership, let's look at the question of leadership in general. We use that term often, but what is it really? What is leadership? What does it mean? How does it work? Huh? So what is leadership? Now, a simple definition, and it applies equally to school leadership. A simple definition is leadership is actually, it is the art and the skills of motivating a group of people to act towards achieving a common goal. But that common goal, that must be reflected upon at different levels when we come to leadership in the education sector. So the first, at the national, the regional, and the global levels, it would mean that school leadership functions as a key component in contributing to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunity for all. And I'm sure all of you recognize that is the title of SDG 4 as articulated in the Agenda 2030. Now, the second level, the level of the school itself. Now, again, coming to the common goal here, the common goal here ultimately is to ensure that learners benefit optimally from the learning experience and that anticipated learning outcomes are achieved, but not just that they are achieved in a stimulating, in a safe, and in a learner-friendly environment. So these are the two levels at which we must see this, what I call common goals. And that relates to the definition of what a leader is. And at both these levels, the global, reflecting on the agenda, and at the school level, leadership as a concept is typically broad, and it calls for a range of essential qualities. Qualities such as vision, team leadership, targeted action with a result-based approach, that is very important. So targeting action towards achieving results, but then also dedication and perseverance. And that is important, especially in times of crisis. And indeed, better school leadership has really shown to lead to better education outcomes. There's a report from the Regional Education Bureau in Bangkok, I believe from 2018. It also leads to improving teaching quality and ensuring also the effective use of resources. So more value for money, more effective using of resources. Now let me then come to the topic on school leadership in the context of COVID-19. So what does this mean in times of COVID? We have seen globally that due to the lockdowns, education systems have really collapsed. They have been affected everywhere, in almost all countries, and also at all levels, from early childhood to basic education to tertiary and higher education. Today, still over 1 billion learners are affected by school closures, but also universities, so it is the whole spectrum of education. At the peak, which was in April, we saw that the number was over 1.7 billion learners. So that is really massive and very impacting. And now the question is, what is the role of school leaders? And for school leaders, the immediate concern would be that this jeopardizes what I referred to earlier as the common goal. And the common goal is jeopardized at the two levels, both at the global, so the achievement of SDG 4, but also at the school level. And therefore, the first concern of school leadership would be to identify measures to mitigate the immediate impact of school closures and to facilitate the continuity of education for all through remote learning modalities. In addition, effective school leadership would also look at the medium to the longer term, and it would look here at opportunities to build back better from the crisis and after the crisis. So these are two different timelines. It is the immediate, the mitigation, and it is the medium to longer term building back better. And the kind of school leadership needed in this context requires actually two additional key qualities of a strong school leadership. And I would therefore add here the qualities of creativity and innovation. And these both include an adaptive capacity to learn from the crisis, and to evolve better in times of crisis. And these qualities become particularly important in times of change and times of crisis. And they need to address a range of questions. Just to share a few so that I illustrate my point. Questions like, how can we ensure the continuity of learning using distance learning modalities? How does this work in environments with low ICT penetration? And even energy access. Let's face it, most of the schools in sub-Saharan Africa even don't have connection to the grid. And that is quite a challenge. So how can you even think of ICT access if there's no energy for the school? So the creativity comes in terms of, someone wants to come in?
Yeah, that's to ask you to wrap up in 2 minutes. It's very interesting, but because of time, I would like to ask you to wrap up in 2 minutes, please.
Okay. Apologies. I can stop right here. That's possible.
No, go ahead for 2 more minutes. It's okay.
Okay, so think in terms of creativity, think about radio, TV, mobile apps. Another question, how do we ensure we take care of the most vulnerable? And I think about those in remote areas, in villages, in rural areas, or those learners with special needs, disabled. Another question that needs to be addressed is, how do we ensure continued motivation, commitment, and student and teacher success? So that is also a role of school leadership. And how do we prepare best for the reopening of schools, and how do we ensure all learners indeed find their way back to schools? There is, of course, that risk that we lose a significant portion. So the combined skills of vision that I mentioned earlier and the adaptive capacity with creativity and innovation to learn and evolve from the crisis, that presents opportunities really to come out better from the crisis and be better prepared also for future crises. And here the visionary school leader would look at opportunities to build back better, for example, through improving ICT infrastructure, modernizing schools, especially in the rural and even in the off-grid situations of energy access. Look at capacities of teachers and skills to manage ICTs and modern technologies. Use connectivity also to establish possible collaborative arrangements and networks between schools. Think about what that can do to the quality and continuity of education. In short, I would say the sky is the limit. And this is adequately reflected by the UNESCO International Institute of Education Planning, which states in a report in 2018, which is on school leadership and management. It says that schools need leaders who have a vision for improving quality and learning outcomes and who are also effective at ongoing management tasks. School leaders should be actively involved in setting goals with teachers for quality learning and in helping teachers to solve problems. So I therefore would encourage you to really discuss this further and to deliberate on the key ingredients and innovative strategies that are needed to build resilient school leaders and managers that can ably support these mostly in need. So as to improve the quality of teaching and learning and ensure effective use of resources. And I would like to conclude by saying actually there is a positive spiral possible if you think of it. Better school leaders lead to better schools, and school environment leads to better learning outcomes. This is an upward spiral which we need, especially in times of crisis. If we focus on this, I'm sure also the education sector globally and especially here in Africa will indeed build back better out of the crisis. So with these remarks, I wish you very fruitful deliberations in this webinar. Thank you very much, and over to you, moderator.
Thank you very much, Professor, for this very informative speech and insightful guidance. I think we have taken a lot of lessons from your speech. Thank you very much once again. Now I'm going to give the floor to Dr. Hungi Njora, who is the Senior Program Specialist at IGBA. He's going to tell us about the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on school leadership and governance based on presentation of results of a rapid assessment IGBA conducted. So Hungi, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. Hello, Salu, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you so much, Salu. I'll go very quickly.
If you could make your presentation in 10 minutes or so, that would be great. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I'll try to do that. Can you go to the next slide, please? We did a quick survey, and we did it through the Google Forms, and the survey was to look at what are some of the issues that are affecting the school leaders during this crisis, and also how best can we support them during this crisis. Next slide, please. So the survey background, as you can see, the respondents in that graph, most of them, we had 392 of them responding, and 2/3 of them are from Kenya, but we also have good numbers from Uganda and Nigeria, about 10% each. And in terms of male, female, we have 226 male and 160 female. Next slide, please. I should have mentioned there before that it is a convenient sample, therefore it's not a scientific sample, so you cannot use these results to generalize, but they can give you an idea of what's going on. Okay, the next, already there. We asked the school heads, about or around how many % of your students are you and teachers are you keeping in touch with on a weekly basis? And those are the results that we got. You can see from the graph that only a few, less than 15%, if you look at the two green arrows at the top, that is 7.4 plus 7.4 is about 14.8. Only about 15% of them are keeping in touch with about 80% or more of their students. And at the bottom there, you can see that about a quarter are telling us they're not keeping in touch at all with their students. Next slide, please. In this graph, we are looking at in details. If we divide the data into, we look at the subgroups of teachers, school leaders that we have, and then we look at what is happening within the subgroups, who are keeping in touch a bit more or who are not keeping in touch a bit more. And you can see from this graph, the one in blue is the student one, and the one in brown is the teacher one. And you can see that keeping in touch levels are better in private schools, as you can see with the red arrow there, and also among readers who are receiving at least one kind of support. We also ask the teachers, are you getting any support to continue running your school during this pandemic? And you can see that those who are getting some kind of a support with the yellow lines, yellow arrows at the bottom, they are keeping in touch a bit more. Also, we are getting secondary school leaders keeping in touch a bit more than primary. Next slide, please. We also asked the school leaders, what method are you using to keep in touch with the students? And you can see the method they're keeping that they are using. The main method that came up was the social media for both the students as well as the teachers, and also use of the phone. For those two methods, you can see that for the students, you almost have 40 something %, and for the teachers is about 75. Of course, the teachers are fewer, and of course, the teachers are others, they have mobiles, they are easier to contact. Next one, slide, please. So we also asked the teachers, the school leaders, what are some of the challenges that you are facing? Or rather, we gave them a list of challenges, and we asked them to say which among those ones are their major challenges. And these challenges were informed by another study that was done by global school leaders who found this among the challenges. So we picked from there. Theirs was a qualitative study. So ours, we did a bit more quantitative, and we wanted to find out the exact percentages. And you can see what is happening with the bottom, the top, those are the two bars at the bottom. There is where we are getting teachers saying, or school leaders saying that they have a lot of challenges. So the main challenges being faced by school leaders include keeping schools afloat, that is financially, and monitoring distance learning classes. Next slide, please. Now, if we divide the data for the challenges, the two major challenges that you have seen that they are saying, and then we look at the subgroups of the head school leaders and see who are the school leaders who are struggling most with keeping school afloat, and who are those who are struggling most with distance learning classes. And you can see that for both government and private schools, they are all struggling with the finances. You can see the green arrows there with the blue graph. The levels are about the same, 57.6 and 57. They're about the same. So government as well as private are struggling. And also you can see levels of challenge or challenges are higher among school leaders receiving no support at the bottom with the yellow arrows. Next, please. Now, apart from challenges, we also asked the school heads what are their main worries, what their main concern at this time, what is worrying them most. And you can see that at the bottom of the graph, again, those are the two things that came up. They are worried about depletion of school funds, which is also a challenge because we saw in the other graph that it was a challenge. but also it's now a concern. And also they are worried about student learning loss. And around 2/3 of the school heads are highly concerned about student learning loss and distribution of school funds during this time. Next slide, please. Okay. Then we can divide the data again and have a look at who are the teachers who are most school leaders who are most high, who are more worried about student learning loss and depletion of school funds. The blue graph is the one about student learning loss, and the other one in brown is the depletion of school funds. And you can see that many school leaders in secondary schools and government schools are worried about student learning loss. You can see with the red lines or the red arrows there. And you can also see that the levels of concern about depletion of school fund in private and also in government schools, they are actually the same. It is 65.2 and 65.3. This is roughly this. It's exactly the same actually. So both of them are private and government are worried. And you can also see that what is about depletion of funds are higher among those receiving no support. So of course, if you're not getting anything, you'll be more worried. So next, please. Hello? Okay, concerns. We can also look at the concerns in terms of student dropouts, because this is also another issue, and also student welfare. These are the issues that are worrying the school leaders. And you can see from the blue graph that what is about student dropouts are high in government schools and secondary schools. We can understand that in secondary schools, these children are becoming toward teenager, and some of them are getting a bit old. So they are easily to be dropped out and not come back to school after this. But the other ones for primary, they might come back because they are still young. And also the levels of worries about student welfare are high among female school heads and those not receiving any support. Actually, this was consistent, that whenever you're not getting a support, you're more worried or you have more challenge. Next slide, please.
Hungi, could you wrap up in 1.5 minutes, please?
I'll try to do that. Support
okay, thank you very much.
Received by school leaders, and you can see that we asked the school leaders if they're getting this kind of support, and you can see that very few school leaders are receiving any support. Actually, only 17% are receiving. Okay, next slide, please. And if you break the receiving support into subgroups, you can see that for all subgroups, almost everybody is getting very little support. And more so in private schools, if you look at the red arrow there, they are getting less than government. But in Nigeria, it looks as if they are getting a bit more at 36. But remember, the Nigeria sample was not big. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. In this one, we are asking the school heads. We gave them some list of items that we thought would help in distance learning using ICT, and we asked them whether those would support them in monitoring distance learning classes. And you can see what is happening. Nearly 2/3 of the school leaders think that provision of ICT devices would help them to monitor distance learning classes. And the next one, please. This is the last one. These are what we are thinking that the data could be telling us, but we should also remind you this is a convenient sample, and also most of the data came from one country. Therefore, the results might not reflect the other countries as a total, but they give us an idea what's going on. So we are saying this: we should build the capacity of school leaders to run school during school closure. This could include providing them with training on monitoring distance learning classes, improving their access to ICT devices and free internet. This could also involve provision of funds to cover for telephone charges and fixed costs, such as standing charges for electricity and water bills, as well as maintenance for physical schools, such as buildings, facilities, and equipment. We have qualitative data, which is giving us also this kind of, is consistent with what we are getting from the quantitative data. So I think that I'll stop there for the sake of time, and thank you so much, Sergio.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hongi, for this presentation, which has provided us with concrete information taken from the responses given by those who were assessing. Now, I'm now going to give the floor to Dr. Victoria Kisaki-Kanobe, who is going to conduct the panel. So, Dr. Victoria, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sergio, for the wonderful moderation. In the interest of time, I'm going to invite our panelists to start making their presentations. And we are going to begin with a presentation from presentation is going to be made by Dr. Ndayabanje Irene, who is the Director General of Rwanda Education Board. Since February 14th, 2018. Prior to his appointment, he was a lecturer of the University of Rwanda and the College of Education. He was a PhD in education planning from Kenyatta University, and education research and management. He has also taught in several higher learning institutions. He has published a lot of research. He has been peer reviewing of a number of journal textbooks, and he's has got proven experience both at the regional and international levels. So I would like to welcome Dr. Ndayabanje on the floor to make his presentation in 7 minutes. Over to you, Dr. Irene.
Thank you, Victoria. Thank you, everyone. I would like that I show actually my presentation so that I can kick off. Good. As my predecessor actually mentioned it, we are in a special moment where by actually the education sector, as any other sector of life, has been hit by COVID-19. But it's important that we think about how school remain alive even during these hard moments. So that's the reason why actually my presentation is going to focus on how school leadership actually also played a pivotal role to show that even learning can still happen beyond the physical setting. So as introduction, I will say that leadership in education is about learning. In the presentation of Professor, I was saying that traditionally we know school leadership on two main pillars. One is motivation, second is goal. So for us, our motivation is about learning. Then the goal is about learning outcomes. That's the reason why wherever you are as a school leader, you should be having in mind how best should I drive the learning process. And in actual fact, that's the reason why I emphasize the point that actually leaders should be think about the solutions. So we should think even the solution during this moment of crisis, whereby actually nobody has an answer, but as a school leader or as a leader, you need to find and even improvise what I can call special answers to special circumstances. So in a crisis or in emergency situation like this one, we should guarantee education. So if we say that people cannot live without food, without water, they're all the same. The society cannot live without education. So we need to make sure that education is continuous, irrespective of the circumstances. Next slide. So when we talk of school leadership in a Rwandan context, we mean actually 5 main pillars. The very first one is about having a strategic direction. When you are appointed as a school head or headmaster or head teacher, depending on the country, we expect of you, first of all, to have what we call a school improvement plan. If you made your school on a status A, you are supposed to drive it to a point B. So to arrive at that point, you need to work together with the community. You need to work together with teachers, with school general assembly, normally commonly known as the parent-teacher association, but mainly you need to involve the student. So in actual fact, as you elaborate the school improvement plan, you are leading learning, you are leading teaching, but also you are managing the school as an organization. You need, as I was mentioning, to work hand in hand with parents, but also very importantly, work with the community where the school is supposed to be serving. Next slide. Good. How does school leadership now work, especially in Rwanda during this moment? I would say that around mid-March, when the schools were closed because of COVID-19, we had to think about what is next, how students are going to behave in rooms, in houses, in their families, with their parents. What best experience can we give to the students so that they, in the near future, think that even if we passed hard moments, at least there was a provision for education. One, we had to boost our e-learning platform, but because internet cost was heavy for some parents, we had to negotiate with telecommunication companies. Here we have two leading ones. One is called Airtel, another one is MTN. So through the negotiation, actually using Rwanda Education Board, which is the overseer of the entire basic education in Rwanda, the access to our learning platform became free, 7 days, 24 hours. Secondly, because of the wide reach of radio, we thought of introducing radio learning programs. Today, we are using more than 10 radio stations that reach the entire nation. But also there are some subjects that were very hard to teach using radio. For instance, practical sessions, science, for instance, physics, chemistry, or even biology. So the reason why we introduced TV learning programs. So we are using now 8 TV stations. But also, much as we are using e-learning platform, much we use the radio and TV, we said, how can we ensure that learning is happening? You know, for learning to happen, the students need to interact with the learning materials. So we introduced self-assessment platform that are mobile-led. So we have an application, on mobile application, which is also free, whereby students can test themselves. So the mobile application covers all subjects across the curriculum, from pre-primary, primary, and even secondary education. You would even ask, how come a child of P1, primary 1, 6 years old, can manipulate a mobile phone? For us, we don't put like a login or user password. It is open, meaning that even parents can use this application as they help their children to learn. But again, we did a survey and we realized that there were 2 categories of the learners that were not benefiting of our efforts. The first category was made of the students actually who have learning disabilities or special needs. So we targeted this category and we are now printing and distributing handouts. In actual fact, we could only know these students through school leaders. So we actually do what we call weekly surveys to know whether our efforts are yielding the expected results. So that's why we could see through the school leaders this category of learners with visual impairment and which are now benefiting of the print materials. But also through school leaders, they told us about another category, because school leaders are also part of our citizens, but they are our key informants. They told us about another category of students from poor families or from vulnerable families who cannot access that radio because there is no radio in the house, who do not have a TV because there is no electricity or TV in the house. So that's why we started even a big project under the support of European partners of distributing a solar radio in those vulnerable families. I would say that the school leaders played the 2 mentioned here role. One, they share the weekly schedule, the one on the radio and TV, but they also mobilize parents to support their children. You know, when students are learning at a distance, the person teaching the studio does not know who is following the lesson. The only person who can play the role of the teacher is the parent. The only person who can play the role of a head teacher or the headmaster is the parent. So school leaders play a pivotal role in mobilizing the parents. But again, also school leaders, as I said earlier, they participate in the weekly surveys about the effectiveness of the learning that we are doing at a distance. Next slide. Good. Much as we are doing what we do, there are, of course, challenges. The very first one is about the platform that would link school leaders and the parents, or even the teachers themselves. In actual fact, when COVID came, we did not have actually a platform that connect all education key stakeholders. So what the teachers are using now is kind of WhatsApp platform, which connect them with parents or even teachers. And WhatsApp has become actually a forum for communication, for meetings, but even for peer support or peer learning, because even a teacher in the house wants now also to upgrade his or her knowledge. But again, another challenge has been the fact that in our context, even if we are advancing or even we have done some miles ahead in terms of ICT in education, but the gadget that we provide, they are meant for schools. They are not meant for teachers. So the fact that a head teacher wants to drive the teaching and learning is good. But do our teachers have smartphone or even their laptops? Not every teacher, and therefore, what we are doing, that is what I'm going to show in the next slides, that they are improvised solutions so that at least teachers are benefiting of this gadget so that they can remain in the network of what is happening. Next slide.
Doctor, you have 1 minute, so
yes,
just use it nicely. Thank you.
Definitely. So in order to respond to the challenges, first of all, I would say in order for a school head or a head teacher to lead the teaching while the students are at home, so the head teachers are now lending textbook to the students. So they are registered at school, you take textbooks in your home, then you will bring them back. But again, school leaders are reaching out to parents, as I said, with learning disabilities, but also they are lending laptop to teachers so that teachers can use this period of lockdown through what we are calling peer learning or even continuous professional development courses. But also school leaders are mobilizing teachers so that these teachers can provide the questions that are feeding our data bank in terms of question item bank that we are using at different levels of education. But also they are mobilizing parents because we use this period to construct as many schools as we can to reduce overcrowd and long distances. Next slide, which I think is the last. Some of the strategies that we are thinking about is actually to have an education system which is more ICT-led, where we are going to have integration of the system that are going to help us actually to monitor teachers' attendance, students' learning outcomes, and so forth. We are also going to come up with school counseling services so that during this lockdown, students might have some psychological problems. So we need actually to set this forum so that we can better even provide some psychosocial support to our students. Otherwise, I would say we are learning a lot, and the lessons that the Rwanda Education Board has learned are going to inform further steps to make a resilient education system. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Irene. We really appreciate and for making this wonderful presentation. Colleagues, I want to encourage you to raise your comments and questions in the chat room. We have a chat moderator who is taking care of those comments. And for those that are not presenting, we kindly request you to switch off your microphones and then mute your microphones and switch off your cameras. Now, our next presenter is Mr. Baguma Philbert. He's the Secretary General for Uganda National Teachers Union. He's a seasoned educator, and he's a graduate. He has experiences as a teacher, as a head teacher, and he holds a master's degree in education management. I would like to invite you, Mr. Philbert Baguma, to make your presentation in the next 7 minutes. We hand over to you right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor, and good afternoon, everyone. I will request the one in charge to flash the presentation. This afternoon, we are looking at
Henok, we are waiting for the presentation for Philbert.
School leadership and governance in countries in Africa during this uncertainty and post-COVID-19. I want to say there is a challenge. I don't see the presentation being displayed. So the first question is, how can school leadership be enhanced to address the current unpredictable sector challenges posed by COVID-19 pandemic and during the school reopening process? We need to have issues to consider, and first and foremost, we need to look at the definition of school leadership. What is displaying is not mine.
Give me.
Check for the presentation of Baguma, not Rebecca. So we need to look at the definition of school leaders and governors we are looking at. We need to, first of all, look at the head teachers, the teacher leaders, student leaders who are normally forgotten whenever we are talking about school leadership and governance. We have school directors, we have principals, we look at board of governors, we look at foundation bodies, university councils, among others. These are groups we are looking at whenever we are talking about school leadership and governance. How can school leadership be enhanced to address the current unpredictable sector challenges posed by COVID-19 and during the school reopening process? First and foremost, we need to look at the understanding the impact of COVID-19 on school leadership and governance. The COVID-19 pandemic cast school leaders and managers in sudden anticipated waters where they were expected to act first to save the lives of the school community and then their own lives. Our school leaders and managers have been currently likened to actors or actresses in a play where the story, the script, and costumes have all changed midway the performance, and they are on stage improving and improvising on how to adjust their new roles. The show must go on, but the question is how? The situation has created a number of challenges, such as school leaders and managers having no prior experience or training to deal with such a crisis. Yet government and other stakeholders expect them to succeed in their new roles, ensuring learning continues, though remotely. School leaders and managers are expected to act as coordinators of distance learning, but most do not have close contacts or relationships with the parents, the guardians, the communities, as most of them usually have laissez-faire or hands-off relationship concerning the education of their children. Some parents do not mind about having contacts with the schools where their children go for education. We have school leaders and managers who are expected to act as motivating agents by giving learners and teachers the much needed mental and psychological support during this time when the future is uncertain. However, They are doing so without adequate information on the status of school opening, because those planning for the sector have not involved them in the process, in the entire process. You have a case where you find the Ministry of Health is working and it is supposed to give technical guidance, but all others wait to hear what will come from the ministry. And even at the closure, all they were given was a deadline when to close. And they are only waiting to hear the pronouncement when to open. What needs to be done? We need to look at the strategies that can help us in this situation. One, school leaders and managers should be involved in the process of preparing the guidelines for the recovery and the reopening of the education institutions. Government should not work in isolation. All steps towards reopening should be coordinated well with all stakeholders. There is an urgent need for governments to consider supplementary funding to education institutions to enable them, to enable the school leaders and managers to effectively implement standard operating procedures in preparation for the reopening of institutions. They should not be expected to perform without the necessary support. Otherwise, the schools will not operate under the new normal. There is an urgent need for thorough support and training to enable school managers and leaders to fit in their new roles. We call them new roles because we are operating in the new normal. They are being asked
you have 1 minute, Hilda.
Thank you.
1 minute.
They are being asked to secure lives, and the entire school community remains safe and healthy. As they prepare this, there is a need for education institutions to do much. But what we need to know is whether they have the knowledge and skills to do this, because they need a lot to be done on their part. There are so many lessons, but to mention but a few, there is urgent need for the linkages between the school community and the leaders and managers as we prepare for the reopening. There is also a need to create networks for the school managers to know what has worked elsewhere, and we domesticate it in our context, for example, in the context of Uganda. The final thought is that it is important to anticipate the reopening of education process, because the learners are stressed, the parents are stressed, they don't know what is going to happen next. However, these plans for reopening need to involve all stakeholders to ensure the well-being of the learners, the well-being of the teachers, and the well-being of every person in the school community. The leaders and the managers must be helped to fit within the new normal, and that's when we shall realize the teaching, although there is a remote teaching currently, but the assessment, the monitoring is not adequate, and it leaves very many learners out, thus violating SDG 4. I want to thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Phil, but very interesting presentation indeed. Colleagues, you've been asking for the presentations, you are going to get them. So we look forward to more of your comments and in the chat room and questions. Now we are moving to the next presenter, who's a beautiful lady from Gayaza High School. It's a school in Kampala, Uganda. She's Ms. Rebecca Bukira Kampumure. Director of Studies, but she's also a teacher and the head of the chemistry department, which she's been heading for 5 years. She teaches chemistry and mathematics, and she has been doing that for the last 21 years. She's also a seasoned editor, writer, and the whole master's education. I invite Ms. Rebecca to give her presentation on her thoughts in the next 7 minutes. Over to you, Ms. Rebecca.
Thank you, Victoria. I would like to thank my fellow presenters for this afternoon session. And then I would also like to thank the people who are listening in. This is a very important topic. We know that we are all faced with this pandemic, so we need to move forward as a world. In my presentation, I'll basically look at 3 things. Remember, I'm a teacher and I'm the coordinator of the online teaching in Gayaza High School. I'll look at the challenges that we have been faced with as a school. I'll look at the key lessons learned out of this pandemic and the teaching that we are carrying out, and then the strategies to move forward. Okay, next slide. I'll begin with the challenges. We have conducted these online lessons right from March up to now. At Gayaza High School, we are still conducting lessons, but one of the challenges we've been faced with is that it is difficult to get 100% student attendance because not all students have access to internet connectivity and tools. Some have no mobile phones, others have no computers. Those who could have computers and mobile phones don't have internet connectivity. So it has been very difficult to reach all our students. Then the next challenge is that not all teachers had digitized their content before the pandemic. The pandemic caught us off guard, so we're all told to pack and go home and went into a lockdown. So we had to use the materials that we had digitized at that moment. So that means that we can't offer 100% content to our learners. Actually, what we are currently doing is that at Gayaza High School, we are basically doing revision of what the learners have as the teachers prepare the untaught content. Then the other challenge, we have competing home activities like house chores. We all know that in Africa, you cannot expect a girl child to wake up and sit on the computer from 9 up to 5 in the evening. So we expect them to get involved in housework. So at times you find that teachers are teaching while other students are involved in house chores. They are cleaning and preparing lunch. So that has also been a challenge. Then the other we have is a challenge of inadequate ICT skills. Now this cuts across among the teachers, the students, and the parents. At the moment, the students are with the parents, so we expect the parents to help. But we found it difficult that some parents cannot navigate some of these ICT softwares. So we find it as a challenge. So even the teachers, there are new innovations that we could use like Zoom and even and others. But the teachers are not adequately prepared to use these recent innovations. So most of us have resorted to using what we can ably use. Then the other, we have the financial constraints. My colleague has tackled a bit of this. We are supposed as school administrators to provide teachers with data. And sometimes data is not enough. The fact that we are occupying them during this lockdown, they would expect an allowance, and rightly so, because they also don't have money. So, but most school administrators had not budgeted for this. So we are finding it as a challenge, because if we are to keep the students learning, we must have data, and the teachers have to be paid. Then the other challenge is lack of netiquette by the learners. They come in, register their presence, and get log off. Some of them get involved in chats with friends, so that you might think that you're teaching a class of 50, but the active participants are only 10, sometimes even 20. So that has been a challenge. Then the key lessons learned. This pandemic has exposed our education system to the realities of the 21st century. There is need for teachers and students to be ICT compliant. We all need to be ICT compliant so that we can navigate easily through the recent developments in ICT. Then there has to be flexibility by management to relocate funds to support emergencies. I know schools budget, but at the moment when we are faced with a pandemic, there is no use of starting a new building when you have data at hand. So we need to be flexible to relocate funds in times of emergencies. Next slide, please. There should also be a deliberate effort by school leadership to support teachers digitize their content. Now, this one has to be worked out because at any particular moment, every student should be able to access all teaching materials anytime, anywhere. But this can only happen if the teachers have digitized their content. Sometimes they don't have the money, so they need to be supported. Then school leadership should also ensure that all study materials are in soft form and can be accessed by a majority of the learners. This one I've already talked about it. Then the other key lesson is that schools that are well equipped with ICTs need to support underprivileged schools by organizing workshops and trainings. Here in Uganda, there are schools that have no computers. The teachers are not trained in any ICT skills, so we need to work as a team. That shows our ICT, our e-learning platform of Gayaza. Now the strategies. We need to strategize and build learning management systems, digitize content and upload it there. When this pandemic started, the Gayaza e-learning platform has had more than very many viewers because it got us prepared. Many schools had not prepared, so other schools have to prepare learning management systems. Then we also need to engage internet service providers to subsidize access to learning platforms as a social corporate responsibility. For example, MTN in Uganda has done it. It has subsidized, it has actually zero-rated most learning institutions' platforms. So all you need is data to get in there, but you can, the moment you've gotten in there, you can always navigate without using data.
Only have 1 minute.
Okay, Victoria. Schools should open up their learning management systems to share content with a wider community. We know that the world needs collaborators, not competitors. There is need to share, like in Gayaza, we have shared with the rest of the world. Then schools should periodically get feedback from the 3 stakeholders, the parents, students, and teachers, on the effectiveness of the methodologies used during the online lessons. Don't just teach. Periodically get views, get feedback from the parents whether what you're doing actually works. Then the last one, we need to harness the potential of social platforms like WhatsApp, Facebook, and Telegram. These platforms have now turned into classrooms. This is what many people are using, like the research that someone shared. Thank you, and never give up. Over back to you,
Thank you so much,
Victoria.
Rebecca. Thank you so much, Rebecca. We really appreciate the wonderful presentation. Colleagues, we want to thank you so much for posting your comments, your questions in the chat room. We are supposed to be having another speaker, but he's not yet online. That is Mr. Sawanda Masebola, the Director of Research.
I'm online.
Oh, you are? Wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay, beautiful. So we have Mr. Sawanda Masebola is the Director of Research from the Ministry of Basic Education in Botswana. Of course, he's a teacher by profession. He has taught across all levels of education, and he's the Deputy Chairperson for the Botswana University Council and currently the Director of Education Planning, Research and Statistics. He's going to give us his few remarks in terms of how he feels about the whole discussion that we are having. I hand over to you, Mr. Sawanda Masebola, to talk to us in the next 5 to 7 minutes. Over to you.
Thank you, Madam Director. First, let me apologize for joining you a little bit late. I had some connection problems, but I've managed to solve the problem. But I must hasten to mention that in Botswana, we have already reopened our schools. But I must start with the lockdown itself, that immediately after the pronouncement of the pandemic, all of us were in shock because the head of state declared a state of emergency where everybody has to go under lock in your house without moving. It means the entire education system stopped also, as everybody was affected. And there was a pandemic in terms of fear among our learners and our teachers that students this year are going to fail and they'll be blamed by the parents and the communities that they have not delivered on their mandates. There was also, this affected both teachers and the learners. And we had a problem of job losses by parents. And this morally affected the learners at home when they saw parents who could not afford to provide as they used to do. Even the learners missing their friends at schools. There was a problem of gender-based violences, which was experienced and reported by the police in different spheres, which even affected our learners where some of them were sexually abused. We had such kind of things. But nevertheless, we also had very stringent COVID-19 protocols, which we had to adhere to, even when we had to open the schools, which were very strenuous to meet. For example, we were to have water 24/7 in all our schools, to wash our hands time and again, and for the learners to wash their hands, and the teachers. We needed sanitizers. We needed temperature takers. We needed social distancing. We needed to daily register anybody who enters the school. We needed isolation rooms in our schools in case somebody is not feeling well. We needed the cleaners with specialized detergents for cleaning. We needed even SHE officers, whom we have never had in our schools before, to monitor the situation. So you can see these are some of the challenges that we seriously had. But as a way forward, I must say the government of Botswana was very proactive in providing many of those. Immediately as the ministry, we set up task forces all across the country, including at school levels, where to make sure that all the protocols that are demanded by the COVID-19 protocol teams are adhered to. So we had to reschedule, even to re-class size our classes. Where we used to have 40 learners, it means now our classes, in terms of social distancing the classes, we needed to divide our classes. This called in for extra manpower in our schools. And also we needed to make sure that we provide isolation rooms, all these things that have been mentioned in that protocol, COVID-19 protocols needed. We were forced to provide all those. But as I'm speaking to you now, we have opened our schools. All these issues are in place all over the country. And also we had to refurbish. This, I can say, also came as a blessing also, even though it's dangerous because people are dying, because we had to refurbish all our schools across the country so that they are compliant. We had to fumigate our kitchens and our schools, disinfect where areas in the country where probably 1 or 2 people were positive with COVID-19. All those kind of things were put in place. But we learned a lot of things out of this COVID-19. One, we are quite unaware that it's high time that we need risk management managers in our schools, like today, to prepare for any eventualities and any emerging issues in our own schools, and to assess some of these critical areas so that we're over prepared. Also, another thing that we learned was that we need to retrain our school leaders, because this pandemic needs that a teacher must be very creative and innovative, or the school leadership must be very creative and innovative in dealing with some of these issues. And also it was up to us to upskill the teachers, especially in the areas of ICT, so that if these things happen again, we need to teach from homes through the specialized gadgets, of course, ICT gadgets that we need to provide. So these are some of the few that are probably I need to share with you. But many of these things that I'm mentioning, they are now in our schools. Where we are regularly monitoring this. The reports are coming to my office from each and every individual school to explain what is happening, even where they meet the challenges, so that we can see how we assist them to mitigate against some of these measures. Briefly, this is how we are in Botswana, and this is where we are.
Thank you,
Madam.
very much. Thank you so much, Mr. Sowanda, for sharing that experience in from a unique perspective of already like Botswana has already opened up the schools and the kind of measures that you've put in place. Now, colleagues, we have very few minutes remaining to the end of the webinar. I'm going to request that I borrow 10 minutes of your time for those that are able to stay, but I'm also going to swap around the program so that we are done with all the presentations, and then we can go into the questions and answers and comments that we address the questions and comments that you've brought forward in the chat room. So allow me to invite the last presenter, who is going to give us a presentation in terms of the toolkit that has been developed to support our school leaders. This is Mr. Peter Wallet from the International Task Force on Teachers for Education 2030, and he's a colleague working at UNESCO headquarters. And he's going to be giving us a brief presentation on this new toolkit that is instrumental for all of us. I hand over to you, Mr. Peter Wallet, to make this presentation in the next 5 to 7 minutes. Over to you, Peter.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Victoria. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to the previous speakers for these excellent illustrations of work happening on the ground to support teachers. I'm pleased to be here today to give you an update on some of the global advocacy work being led by the Teacher Task Force and its members. The Teacher Task Force is a network of over 140 organizations and countries supporting teachers, and it's hosted by UNESCO. Next slide, please. Since the beginning of the COVID-19 crisis, the Teacher Task Force has been advocating for teachers so that they are protected, supported, and recognized during the pandemic. This is not only in relation to school closures and distance learning measures, but also in relation to the school opening process. We recently released some policy guidelines for policymakers, and they aim to provide clear guidance, in particular to public and private institutions on education, which need to be taken for teachers specifically on the reopening of schools. This is to complement some of the other work and these existing frameworks on school reopening by other partners, including UNICEF and the World Bank. Next slide, please. So as school leaders are key in the reopening process, following the COVID-19 related closures, there's a myriad of questions for school leaders on how to prioritize school community safety and health, and ensure that frontline workers, teachers that is, have the support, protection, and tools that they need to resume their work. Following the joint framework for reopening schools by UNESCO and the World Bank and UNICEF, we released a toolkit. So this is designed for school leaders to support them and protect teachers and education support staff in the return to school. The toolkit takes the view of 7 dimensions identified in the policy guidance framework, and it breaks them into a series of actionable guiding questions and tips. The toolkit recognizes the importance of local context. In many countries, the pandemic situation is evolving daily, and local decision making about when and how to reopen is determined by a broad range of considerations. What is right in one country, in one context, in one school is not necessarily the best for another. School leaders will undoubtedly have to make certain set priorities, which are also determined by central government authorities, and trade-offs will be under one of the considerations in terms of, as colleagues talked about, the reduction in classroom size and for safety measures, and there may be selective reopening and readmittance of students to schools based on essential workers or students who are particularly vulnerable. In some cases, closing schools may also have to be reconsidered. So this is also a useful guide in terms of going forward, as we cannot predict where the pandemic is heading, and there could be school closures again. What the toolkit does, though, is it shows that school leaders will need to think about key issues in relation to teachers and education support staff as they adapt national directives to plan the reopening of schools. Next slide, please. So again, the toolkit it looks at 7 dimensions identified in the previous Teacher Task Force policy guidance and breaks them into a series of actionable guiding tips. The first one looks at social dialogue and communication. It discusses about some of the main points around school leaders and how they need to consult with teachers and their representative organizations and other education personnel at the school about the general plan for the reopening of schools, and tips and ideas and resources around communicating with parents and the wider community. Next, please. It looks at the issue of school safety and health. School leaders have a key role in maintaining safe environments for the teachers around them as they return to work, as well as for the students there to learn. They need to ensure staff cooperate with measures so they can guard for their own safety, that of students and other colleagues. Next slide, please. Psychological and socio-emotional well-being. School leaders are anticipating the psychological and sociological impacts on the pandemic on themselves. So teachers need to have, school leaders in particular, as well as all teachers, need to be able to sort of manage their work. They need to have skills related to stress reduction so they can respond to the situation around them, support other teachers, as well as students who may also require some support. Next, please. Teacher preparation. So school leaders should work with teachers in adjusting curricula, teaching methods, and assessment based on instructions from central authorities. So there's a role in terms of ensuring that teachers are assessed in terms of skills gaps and what training can be provided to teachers to ensure well functioning in a new and novel situation. Next, please. School leaders play an important right in assuring the redeployment of teachers and protecting their rights in terms of labor laws and in consideration of the new stresses and constraints put on teachers in terms of issues like double shifting and the spread of students across more areas, which may require more additional work. Next, please. Financial resource investments. School leaders should be costing the measures required to prepare for inclusive, safe, and healthy reopening, and reviewing their budget in terms of how it meets the needs at the school. Next slide. So, of course, nothing would be, it would be remiss to not mention the monitoring and evaluation aspect. And of course, it'll be critical to monitor and carefully assess and evaluate the situation as it adapts, and is including the pandemic. So in thought of how one will readapt and change the plan going forward, it's benchmarking and assessing progress versus the desired achievements is something that needs to happen continually. Next slide, please.
We have 1 minute, Peter.
Perfect. So this is basically an outline of the toolkit and the elements that it covers. It again, it includes a number of key questions that school leaders should be asking themselves. It includes a number of links to various resources, and it also includes a number of tips that that can be implemented as well. So this is just the first edition of this toolkit. We will be going into much more depth, including many more country examples. And we anticipate that this second edition of the toolkit will be available we're hoping by the end of July, before the school year for many countries. So with that said, thank you very much, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. We really appreciate the overview of the toolkit. And colleagues, I have to alert you that the link to the toolkit has been posted in the chat room. So feel free to click on it and access it. In the remaining few minutes, I requested to borrow your 10 minutes so that we can be able to respond to some of the questions that have been raised. I will start off with one question, then I hand over to my colleague Risi as she will take us through all the other comments that have been raised. So one of the things that has been raised is targeted towards Rwanda, and you're being asked, how is Rwanda monitoring the participation of learners in these e-learning sessions? So as Dr. Irene, I hope you're still there responding to that, I hand over to my colleague Risi to compile all the other questions and present them to the key speakers. Over to you, Dr. Irene.
Thank you so much. In actual fact, I tried even to respond to the question using the chat. I said that even that our e-learning platform actually registered who did what and when, so we can know actually how many users were on the platform, and even the platform links the users with people we are calling mentors, or even the teachers who are handling different subjects. So we can on daily basis actually know what was done and who did this. Secondly, using the USSD application on our servers, we can still see the number of attempts that were done. If somebody did the test and scored 3 over 10, that one we can see. If the same person using the same line also again repeats the test and increases in terms of performance, for instance, scoring 7 out of 10, we can still see. So beyond this, for radio and TV, we conduct weekly surveys using the identification of the students. I mean, the phone call, the phone number of their guardians or their parents, but also the physical home visits by our field staff or the people in charge of education at the sector level. So all of these are mechanisms that are there actually to ensure that what we are doing is yielding the expected fruits. So we have on weekly basis actually data alongside what we are doing. So for other questions that were raised around my presentation, I tried to give answers through the chat. So I can give the floor to the rest.
Thank you so much. Over to you, Risi. Risi, you're online. Risi, have you muted your microphone? Okay, as we wait for Risi to join, I'll bring up the other issues that we are raised.
Victoria.
Okay, increase your volume, Risi. Thank you.
Can you hear me now, Victoria? How about now?
Yes. Yes,
okay,
indeed.
Great. Okay, great. Thank you very much. So, so about the questions, actually there are 2 questions to Dr. Ihene regarding illiterate parents and the participation of learners on e-learning platform. They have been answered in the chat room. So thank you very much for the questions and the answers. And now I have 3 questions about 3 aspects. One question is about the management of break for children. The second question is about data protection. And the third one is about assessment and examination at the end of this distance learning in a time of COVID. So I also put the questions, the detailed questions in the chat room. So the first question is about how do school leaders manage time of break for children while students are arranged with assignments, schoolwork, or notes, but not attending school physically. So this is the first question. And the second question is about the comment, is about how to manage data protection of these platforms. And the third question is about the assessment and examination. So could any speakers share your ideas regarding these 3 aspects? Thank you very much. So over to any speakers who have the answer or ideas regarding these 3 questions.
Thank you, Risi. We are also seeing a hand from Dr. Jenny Gao.
Yes, I see the hand So maybe Dr. Jing Ebel, could you please unmute you and maybe raise your comments or answers regarding the questions?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. I want to thank the presenters very much for that very, very insightful presentations that they've given. Chair just had one interest in Botswana. Botswana have indicated to us that they have opened the schools. I wanted them to share with us the experience after opening the schools, the challenges that they may have faced, or whatever they are going through after opening the schools, because we are looking forward to doing the same, but we don't know what is ahead of us. So it will be interesting to hear what the challenge is or what the experience is after opening the schools. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question about reopening the school. So I give the floor to any speakers who have any ideas regarding three aspects I raised before, and also regarding the challenges of school reopening.
I request to start with Botswana, then we move to all the speakers at least to say a comment. Over to you, Mr. Sir Awanda.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you. Yes,
okay.
We can hear you.
Thank you very much. Let me begin with assessment and examinations. Now, in Botswana, remember when we closed our schools, we had to redo our school calendar. It means we have to regain the days that were lost. And this meant that even the examination body, although independent, was approached to reschedule its own examinations. So the examinations were pushed far way backwards so that they allow us to cover the curriculum as fully as we can within the mandate of the Education Act. So we don't think that one is a problem, because what is important is, have we recovered the number of days that we lost during the lockdown? So probably I don't think that one is much of a problem in Botswana so far. But experiences after the opening of the schools, definitely there will always be teething problems. One, we have what is called the daily taking of temperatures. Before you enter any school, whether you are a learner or a teacher, we must take your temperature to find out whether you are fit to be in the school. If your temperature is above 37.4, definitely you can't enter the school. That is done at the school gates by the fully employed chief officers who are managing that situation. Initially, we had a problem of having to register who enters the school. Initially, we had a problem because there was overcrowding at the gates. But later on, we decided that at the gates, people, the washing of the hands, because we have so many washing hand basins at the gates of each and every school with hot water, because it's winter. We have hot water, there are geysers all over. So, and soaps at dispensers at those washing basins. So we decided the registration will be done at the classroom. All that we need to do is to wash hands, sanitize, and take temperature. Then the temperature is taken to the class teacher so that the learner, it doesn't delay, goes to the vertical. The other challenge that we faced was that the moment we opened it, learners had fear. Some of them could not even eat the food that we provide in the schools, because initially the mass feedings nationwide was stopped, because people were afraid that so many hands in the feeding and cooking, one of them might have the COVID-19 virus and it might spread. So learners had that fear that if they go to school and there's this mass feeding, we might have such kind of a problem. But after we provided a psychological social support, things stabilized, because we had them, we mobilized psychosocial support teams all over the country to stabilize both the teachers and the learners. So that has come back to the normality. The other issue that we realized was that kids came to school having lost a lot of, some of the gadgets that we gave them were lost. They could not tell what happened. I think some people, when this lockdown came, people ran away. You know, in Bhutan we have different homes. Some ran to the land, some to the cattle posts, some to the towns, and some of these things could not be located. Even the textbooks, some of them could not be located. So it became a very serious problem. But otherwise, I think we are managing the situation, because even if somebody's temperature rises, we've got an isolation room in each and every school, furnished with beds and chairs, tables, reading materials, so that when we are waiting for the health experts to come and collect you, we are putting you in an isolation room. And also we have made sure that initially we did not have the attire for those who are attending to such kind of people, but now we have managed to buy personal protective clothing specifically for those who are handling those we must suspect might be COVID-19 compliant. But to tell you the truth, in Botswana so far, we don't have many people who have been affected by COVID-19. We only had one death since we started, and only, I think, less than 10 all over the country who were affected positive. The rest were people who were coming outside the country. And our policy is that people are tested because all the borders are closed. We make sure that they are tested at the borders. If you are positive, you are returned. You can't enter the country, especially those who are bringing food into the country.
Mr. Sawanda, I have to interrupt you because of the time.
Thank you, madam.
Thank you very much for those experiences. We have 3 other questions that haven't been addressed, which have been read out by Risi. I'm going to request each of the previous speakers to say one word. Rebecca, over to you, and then to Philbert, and then finally we'll have Irene say a word, then we conclude this. I can see it's very interesting. Rebecca, over to you in 1 minute.
Yeah, I would like to thank you, Vicky and team, for organizing this. This is what we need as a globe to move forward. We should not mourn over a pandemic. Surely God has a plan, and his plan is the best. We didn't ask for it, but it came. So we need to move forward. Let's put our heads together as educators and see that we don't lose out, so that the students don't miss out on the education that they should acquire. And also the teachers, let's prepare ourselves. We need the school administrators to equip the teachers. So let's work as a team. Let's work as a team and support one another, but we shouldn't mourn. Thank you, Vicky.
Thank you very much. Philbert, over to you. If you have any comments on the issues raised and the questions raised, I know you've been responding to some of them. And there's one where they're saying in Karamoja, they only have one radio. No, only 1 out of 10 can access a radio. You know, all these things, you can talk about them. What needs to be done? Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Victoria and your team and the entire family of UNESCO and ICBA for this arrangement. First of all, like we said, we are living in uncertainty. When this happened and the schools were closed, the Ministry of Education has tried to come up with interventions to make sure the continuity of teaching and learning process. In so doing, we have had radio lessons, TV lessons, and printing and distribution of self-study materials. However, these ones leave a lot to be desired because the radios are not covering every part of the country. The radios do not benefit the special needs education children because we have the deaf, we have the blind who cannot benefit from the TV lessons, and even the materials cannot be enough because at the time the institutions were closed, nobody had the statistics of which learners are in which village. And as such, it is still a challenge, but the ministry has tried it what it can in the circumstances. I want also to add that we need, as African countries, where the schools have not reopened, to start thinking of programs that can prepare the parents, the learners, the teachers, and other community members within the school setup psychologically to prepare for reopening, because there is a lot of fear for their lives. And therefore, the only thing we can do is to prepare them, even when we are not sure of when the institutions are reopening, but people need to get on board to know that yes, at any one time, the schools will reopen. Otherwise, if we don't do that, we shall reach a point when we open institutions and the parents fear to send their children. Or when the children go there, they still don't study because of that fear. We also need to have capacity building for both leaders, the managers, the teachers, so that even when we are having remote teaching and learning, it can in a way be assessed so that we don't make assumptions when in actual sense, very many learners are missing out.
Okay, thank you so much, Hubert. I'll hold it there, and I request for Dr. Irene to say a word. I hope he's still online. I'm seeing a hand from South Sudan, from the Minister of Education. I don't even have how to manage this time anymore. Dr. Irene, do you have any comment quickly before I hand over to South Sudan?
Thank you for the floor. I have a very quick one. We need during this time already to recognize the support from the private sector because we could not really achieve much without, for instance, the support for the telecommunication companies. I understand that they are providing free internet connectivity so that we can use our e-learning platform. I underline the TV and the radio station. So this is really very important. But again, development partners are playing a central role because they are funding a number of areas like script writing, like shooting all these lessons, but even also providing expertise where need be. So all in all, those are the areas that I wanted to highlight, but also more importantly, the role of the parents remains central in whatever we are doing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Irene from Rwanda. There's Dr. Mabutu Deng from South Sudan. You have raised your hand. You just only have a minute, please, to raise your issue, and then we close this. Turn on your microphone and talk to us. Over to you. Dr. Mabu? Okay, I think he's muted his microphone. I'm seeing a lot of questions coming up in the chat room about countries that have got psychosocial exam support systems. If you have any examples, kindly inbox the colleague Lucy from Education International and just share your country experiences there. Otherwise, I would like to thank you for this wonderful webinar. There are hot issues being discussed. It's like we can't end because there are many issues. But just to recap, a lot has been shared, right from Professor Hubert Gizen from UNESCO Region Office in Southern Africa. He talked about the importance of us planning better and also helping our school leaders better use the resources. And we have Dr. Irene who talked about the need to ensure that we have strategies for continued learning. And of course, you've heard his voice in terms of some of the things he has about supporting parents. But of course, reinforce the need to be prepared and not to fear and to take the bull by the horns and face the reality, strengthen our systems, and make sure that we support all the stakeholders involved in this process. Rebecca gave us a very nice snapshot of what is happening at the school level in terms of how they are trying to juggle all the pieces amidst all the other challenges that children are faced with at home and making sure that they're engaged, and also the need to ensure that our ICT platforms are working and also supporting teachers to improve their literacy levels for ICT use in education. So she gave a wonderful presentation. We will share all these PowerPoints with you. And then Mr. Sawanda from the Director Research from Botswana also made a presentation on the experiences and how they have been managed to reopen the schools. He has also talked about the phobia learners are having in terms of coping with the new normal. So I would like to thank you all for this wonderful webinar. Thank you so much for hanging in there until we apologize for the 16 minutes that we've overshot, but I think it was important so that you can listen to everyone. And I just want to re-echo that our colleague from headquarters who has given you a snapshot of the toolkit has shared the link in the chat room. Please look out for that link, and so that you can be able to get to know more about this toolkit that has been developed by UNESCO to support the schools and the school leaders and the ministries. We appreciate all of you. We want to thank all the presenters. We want to thank all the moderators. We want to thank Chrissy who has been in the chat room and all the discussion that has been going on in the chat room. Thank you very, very much. On behalf of UNESCO ICBA and on behalf of our director, Dr. Yumiko Yokozeki, I would like to appreciate you for the wonderful deliberations and discussions. Thank you for keeping continue online. Thank you very much. We wish you all the best.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Vic.
If you want a
Thank
report,
you
you can
very
give
much
your
all.
email address. If you
Thank
leave your email address on the chat, we can send you the report.
The French version of this same webinar will be taking place soon, and we shall be communicating to those who are from the French-speaking countries.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.